Okay, there we go. There we go. Did everyone hear that voice? Okay, so welcome everyone to the Weaving the Future podcast recording. Today we're talking about the idea of where do we start, and we're talking specifically about relationships. So when we ask the question of where do we start, this is the question of acknowledging that there's a lot in our current communities and current society that is not working well. And there's a lot of changes that many of us sense need to happen. And many of us ask the question, but where the heck do we start? So I have done an episode already that's answering this question kind of at the individual level. And I should say starting to answer this question at the individual level. And today it's starting to answer this question at the relationship level, or the interpersonal level. So I'll start by saying, by acknowledging that I and many of you that I see joining today are guests or living and working on Secwepemc territory. And it is a big honor to be living in this territory and to be creating relationships, to be connecting with many who are Secwepemc or many who are Indigenous from other territories, in addition to all of the relationships that we create from living and working here, and the relationships with Secwepemc people and with the land itself, the web of life, are particularly important, both in terms of honoring those who have cared for this land since time immemorial, and the honor of connecting with our community. So, okay. So for those of you listening to the podcast, I just want you to know that I have some slides here. I'm going to do my best just to speak to the slides without it requiring you to see them. But just so you know, there will be, you will be able to get access to the slides if you want to see them, or you can check things out on YouTube as well, which will be under Weaving the Future. So first of all, when I talk about what we want to move towards, or what we really maybe need to move towards as a society, there's a few kind of simple but powerful things that I connect with. And it's certainly not just me, but that I have kind of put my finger on as I've been exploring and trying to do this work. And the first thing is the idea that we want lives that are maybe materially simple, which is not something we always strive for or experience in the Western society, but relationally rich. So trying to move towards a feeling of abundance that is not based on what we own, but based on who we're connecting with. And that can be each other, relationship-wise, and it can also be the natural world or the web of life. And then that's related to the second one that I list here, connection and shared responsibility for ourselves, people around us, and the natural world. So really moving from me to we was the way I've heard it said, that we really feel that our responsibility is not just to ourselves or our immediate family, but that we care for the wider community and society and the natural world. And of course, the idea of climate change, climate disaster is really on many of our minds, as well as loss of habitat, and all sorts of related and impending disasters that are happening in the natural world that we don't feel like we have control over, or really don't have immediate control over as humans on Earth. So moving towards regeneration of those natural systems, in as much as we can have control over that as humans. So that's those three major things are the vision that I tune into in terms of like, what are we actually trying to move towards? The next slide here is answering the question of who I am. And this is a picture of a tarot card from the Next World Tarot deck. And I think about it often because it's the idea of considering every intersection, and the specific intersection that it's talking about is the idea of the goddess energy or the worker energy. And the way I think about this is when I think about the way I want to live my life and the world we need to move towards, sometimes I feel like I just want to go to a place of experiencing, connecting deeply with the natural world, experiencing pleasure, going to festivals, singing and dancing, and acknowledging that that's what the world needs. And I often use that quote, don't think about what the world needs, but think about what lights you up inside, because that's what the world needs more of. And I truly believe that. And there's also a need for sitting down and having discipline and being punctual and all of those things. When I think about my work life, I'm a consultant. Some of you I've worked with, some of you that are here today, and I do community-based research and evaluation, and I have a slide that lists it out a little bit more clearly after this. And that requires that I'm sitting at my computer, writing reports, hosting meetings, and I often feel pulled between these. But to be the way that this tarot card describes it is, we need to judge them, excavate their roots, disregard their inaccuracies, and choose your chosen path, or take your chosen path with total awareness. So there's things to learn in both of those places, and there's also potential pitfalls or traps in both of them. And I think the way that society feels right now is that we're leaning so hard into that worker place and forgetting this goddess place, or this, however you want to use it for, if you're male identified, that we have forgotten the role of pleasure and the role of expression and love and care and lighting ourselves up. So that is something that really drives me as I lean into this question of what is next and how do we start. So just a little bit more about who I am. I'm deeply invested in transformation and emergence. I host this podcast, Weaving the Future, which we're all connecting with now. I also am part of a co-op. We just recently became a co-op, a worker-owned co-op, and Bonnie is here on the meeting today. She's another member, and Lindsay Harris is as well. And we do community-based research and facilitation and evaluation, systems change, and we work with a lot of nonprofit and government and some private organizations, and we do a lot of really local work in the Secwepemc region, or what's now known as Kamloops. I also do courses on what I call meaningful impact, so that's doing work on systems change, work with teams that are really tailored to their work, to deeply understand systems change and what impact they can have in the world, moving closer and closer towards the changes that they really want to see in the world, and also learning about evaluation, or how to kind of know if they're on the right track. I also list here that I am doing that goddess thing, so trying to spend time singing, dancing, doing tarot, exploring the world, because there's so much to be learned about what lights me up inside. That's an ongoing journey, as I'm sure it is for many of you listening. But here we are. So, and going into this question of relationship, this is a quote from Pleasure Activism, which is by Adrienne Maree Brown, one of my favorite authors. And she says, "Liberated relationships are one of the ways we actually create abundant justice. The understanding that there is enough attention, care, resource, connection for all of us to access belonging, to be in our dignity, and to be safe in community." So this book, Pleasure Activism, really highlights how important it is for us to connect with our pleasure as we're trying to move towards a new way of being in the world, a new way of the world being. And that the very act of moving towards that new world should in itself be pleasurable. And a lot of that pleasure comes from relationship, because we are social beings and we love being together. what this quote really highlights is that one of the biggest mindsets we need to shift in moving towards a new way of being is moving towards abundance and away from scarcity. And I'll talk about that a little bit later as well. In terms of another idea, in terms of how relationships can transform, actually just bear with me for 1 second because I just need to make a quick change here. I'm going to reshare my screen. Oh, it didn't work. I'm just trying to share my screen so I can actually see my notes, but it's not working, so I might just have to keep winging it. So when we think about how change happens, I really love these idea of interrelated circles, that there's change that needs to happen at our individual level, at our relationship level, and then at the community level and the level of society. These things are all really interrelated, and changes that happen at one level really ripple out to other levels. The relationship level I think of as the glue or the bridge between what happens at an individual level and what happens at community or society level. So community and society is made up of relationships, and it's also made up of individuals. So, it's one of many reasons why it's so important to look at the relationship level in our work. For anyone who has worked directly with me, you've probably seen this triangle. This is called the 6 conditions of systems change, and I use it almost with every project. And Bonnie and I and Lindsay and Tapestry Collective Co-op, we use it often. And it's just the idea of like tuning into how does transformational systems change happen. And there's these 6 things, these 6 conditions that need to shift in order for that to happen. And relationships and connection are at a really deep level of change. They're the type of change that happens when our strength and meaning in our relationship level happens is really transformative, is one of the points that this model is making. A level that's even deeper below that is mental models, which I've talked about quite a bit in past podcast episodes. And there's definitely a link between how we relate to each other and how we see the world, or what our underlying mindsets or narratives are. So I'll talk about a couple of themes in the rest of this part of the discussion today. First, just the idea of moving at the speed of trust. To be honest, I won't say much more than that about moving at the speed of trust. And then I'll talk about transformational collaboration and some kind of high-level ideas that I've learned as I've done work understanding, supporting, and evaluating collaboration in the community. I'll talk about living in close community, and then I'll talk about the idea of mutual aid or caring for each other. And as I go through these, I kind of started with things that feel more in my wheelhouse in my work life, that are frankly a little bit more comfortable for me, and move more towards, let's say, that goddess end, or things that are more kind of in personal life or kind of outside of work life, which are, I would say, more learning edges for me. So the idea of moving at the speed of trust, I feel like there's so much encompassed in that very phrase. Trust moves slowly, and we tend to want to move more quickly, and to think that whatever outcome we're moving towards, or what change we're moving towards, or whatever thing we're creating through collaboration, we think that maybe is more important than the work that it takes to have good collaboration or build trust with each other. And frankly, if we can slow down and move at the speed of trust, we'll get a lot more done, usually at that deeper transformative level of change. So I'll read a little bit of this quote that I have here. Nothing is as fast as the speed of trust. Nothing is as fulfilling as a relationship of trust. Nothing is as inspiring as an offering of trust. Nothing is as profitable as the economics of trust. nothing has more influence than a reputation of trust. So the first thing I'll say about where we can start moving at the speed of trust and trying to shift our mindset that it is that there's always enough time for the right work, and usually that right work is in that relational work, building trust with each other, getting to know each other, and enjoying spending time together. The second thing I'll talk about is transformational collaboration. And the quote that I've put up here it says that transformational collaboration is a state of effortless group flow where there's always a creative solution or workaround to any challenge or obstacles. Everyone feels heard, respected, and values. Working together means play, laughter, joy, and nature. So again, the idea of transformational collaboration emphasizes that working together can and should be pleasurable, that there is a lot of power in that, and that there may be a lot more creative solutions or impact or effect that comes out of working together in that way. Another point that I'll make about transformational collaboration, I put up a picture of an elephant and a bunch of blindfolded people. They're all touching a different part of the elephant. Maybe you've heard this metaphor. The person touching the ear thinks the thing that they're touching is a fan. Someone else thinks it's a wall. Someone else thinks it's a snake because he's holding the tail. It's the idea that we're all blind in some way. We all only really have our own perspective. When we come together to collaborate, we can try to combine those perspectives and create a full picture of what the world looks like, and a more full or complete picture of what change we need to work towards as a collective. And actually, I'm going to change the order here a little bit. And on that note, another thing I wanted to mention about transformational collaboration is that one of the most transformational things we can do as a group of people, as an organization, as a community, and as a society is to have a crystal clear vision, or as clear a vision as possible, of where it is we want to go and how we think we might get there. The trickiest part of that is the how we think we might get there. Usually we don't always have control over exactly what that looks like, and we also have to be comfortable with the idea of emergence, or moving with change the way it wants to happen, if that makes sense. And the clearer we can be about what it is we want to see in the world, the better chance we'll have of getting there. Something that often keeps us from naming that vision is some idea that we don't think it's possible. And I often say to people, well, if we don't name it, it certainly is not possible. But if we do name it, I really think it is. And I've had the honor of being involved with a few groups that named a really ambitious vision, and over a number of years, we're able to move towards that. So that's one of the things that I work on most is vision setting with groups, and making, not just like saying this is the change we want to see. And I don't know if any of you have seen strategic plans where the vision is sort of like, that sounds really nice, but what does it actually mean? What I love doing is actually visions that have a few different areas and a really like a comprehensive description of what would this change feel like and look like. How would we know it's there? How would our relationships change? How would we change? What would we see out in the community if we saw it? So it's that comprehensive idea of the change we want to see in the world. A little bit, something else I'd like to talk about with collaboration is purposes of collaboration, and this is more sort of in the work world. If any of you have been involved in, let's say, collaborative tables or committees or those kind of things, especially committees that involve people from different organizations or sectors, that's the kind of work I really love supporting in the community and helping to evaluate. And something that I've noticed over the years is that it's really good to note the different purposes of why you would come together into collaboration. It sounds very simple, and yet it's not always done. It's not always really explicitly stated why people want to come together, what they hope to achieve with collaborating. Beyond the maybe obvious piece of community building, which is the first one listed here. So community building, the idea of we want to build personal connections with each other. We want to know who each other are. We actually, some groups name explicitly that they want to have mutual support for each other. They want to be able to build trust. And if they have an issue or challenge, they want to be able to know that they have a group of people who are in similar work to come to and ask for help. There's also just the idea of having a committee so that you can identify specific work that you can do together, whether that's a project or initiative outside the committee itself. There's an opportunity to share resources, whether that's information, specific data, equipment, money, skills, staff. And then there's my favorite, which relates to this vision setting that I was just talking about, and that's increasing meaningful impact and increasing efficiency. So being able to, as a group of people, let's say everyone works for a similar sector, or they're trying to change a system, or do really ambitious change in the community. So for example, I work with the Kamloops Food Policy Council. That's how I met Bonnie Clone. And we talked with the Food Policy Council and their network, which is all sorts of food-based organizations, about what would help us as a food system to move towards the ambitious vision that we've noted. And some of that is understanding who's doing what work, where can we reduce redundancy and address gaps, so reduce things that are being done repetitively and address things that are not being done. Where can we build our capacity to do this work better, and how can we actually get to the deeper root causes of what's causing the issues in the system? So that, to me, when we get to that level of collaboration, that's really transformational. One more thing I'll say about transformational collaboration is this, I called it a tension or a challenge, and I think it's also just a natural part of working in collaboration, and that's noting that in any given group of people, you're going to have people that lean more towards being action-oriented, and maybe people that are more process-oriented or relationship-oriented. And even within, an individual, you can see that, for me, I see both. I want to see action and I want to build relationship. And those things don't always... They can pull at each other. So in any given collaborative, being able to name when you might be taking the time to build trust and include diverse voices, understand your situation and identify meaning solutions, that it's really good to name that and not jump right to action. But to maybe let the folks in the room who are more action oriented know that this is what we're doing and it's worth doing. It's worth going backward or going deeper and making sure that our action is actually based in what will be most helpful, for example, and that we trust each other and that we understand each other enough to identify what needs to be done. And it's also good not to spend too long in that place, because I think many of us have been on committees or in groups where we spend too long there and we spin our wheels and we get to know each other and we don't really, it doesn't really go anywhere. So we do want to have our eye on action and purpose and next steps, as long as we're just not doing that too soon. It's my experience that from working with collaboratives, people doing collaboration, that there may be more people, or maybe the people that have louder voices are the more action-oriented ones, and that it's more common maybe to jump to action than it is to stay too long in that relationship place. I'm not going to say that for sure, but that's been my sense, that I have more of a role to sort of slow people down and get them into that process or relationship place. Okay, so that is... mostly what I've talked about so far has been kind of from what I've learned from doing collaborative work in my kind of work life. And I'd like to move more into, okay, what about non-work life or more personal life. And the first thing I'll talk about here is the idea of living in close community. And there was a hypothesis I was working with over the last few years, maybe since Doug and I got together, that the way of the future is eco-villages or intentional communities. I think we had it in our mind at some point that we would live in an eco-village. I don't think we ever fully committed to this idea, but a lot of people we talked to talked about starting one or being part of one. And I think there's a lot of reasons why this would be really appealing to people. The idea of having a lot more control over the everyday way we live our lives, moving away from work, going to work, being in offices, being in service industry, that kind of thing, being such a dominant part of our lives, being able to spend more time with each other, being closer to how our food is grown. Those are all things that feel really good about eco-villages, as well as maybe being closer to, more in touch with how decisions are made that affect our everyday lives. The way that society is right now, with the way governments are voted in and make decisions, we often feel quite far away from that process and not really in control of it. It feels appealing to be in a community setting that we can make those decisions. Unfortunately, there's actually a lot of regulations and bylaws and regional districts and in local government that really get in the way of people living in this way. So as much as it's really great to see more people moving towards this, there's also some real barriers to it right now. The other thing I'll say about it is I have come to recognize that I don't think it's the panacea or the cure-all that some people think it is. And I think the questions that come up for me around eco-villages and intentional communities is how we can do some of this work of living in closer community and having more control over our everyday lives without necessarily, let's say, moving out of current society or I want to even say abandoning society. That's a really strong word, but in some cases it feels like people are, I think abandoning is too strong of a word, but people are moving away and maybe isolating from society in some cases. And I do think it's possible to be in an eco-village and not necessarily do that, but I feel drawn to really understand how we can change this society while also learning from what those living in eco-villages are experimenting with and what they're learning about how different ways to make decisions and live close together. The other question that comes up for me around eco-villages is how inclusive they are, and the idea of land ownership being accessible to those with more financial privilege, for example, and possibly intentional communities or eco-village being more accessible for those with more financial privilege, and possibly there's a racial element there as well. So the question that's on my mind is whether or not we can pursue some of the goals that those looking into eco-villages want to pursue, while also keeping inclusivity, equity, and I guess just society at large still in mind as we're pursuing them. Something that really stands out for me when I think about things like moving towards eco-villages is when you're living in such a close community, it's probably a lot more natural that you'd be caring for each other. And a way of thinking, a picture that I put up here is about mutual aid, and I'll read a little bit of it out for those of you that are listening. So mutual aid is the idea of a voluntary reciprocal exchange of resources and services for mutual benefit. So it's not to be mistaken for charity. It's a horizontal movement of resources in a community as opposed to the wealthy giving to the needy. We are a support system for one another. We are a community. And there's in bold, it says it's a radical act to bypass the system to help your neighbor. And then there's two hands holding each other, and it says we need each other. So the idea of mutual aid, I'll just name that it's a real learning edge for me. So I'm definitely still learning about it. But it's the idea that with the way that we live can be and should be a lot more geared towards really being there for each other. And I think about the very beginning of the COVID pandemic and how many people were really jumping to support each other, that there seemed to be like a real shift for a lot of us in those times. And I also just noticed, I would say this is a learning edge for many of us, the shift from predominantly making sure that we have what we need to look after ourselves versus having a deeper faith that there's enough to go around and that we really can and should be caring for each other, and that there's a real power in that, and that it is a radical act also. And that a lot of the power that we lack through the way our governments and corporations hold control now could actually be bypassed or fought against through this solidarity, caring for each other, mutual aid. So this feels like something to really dive a lot more deeply into. And I want to name that the Kamloops Food Policy Council recently did a book club on a book called Mutual Aid. And I think there's a lot more work to be done, or that is planned and will be done through the Food Policy Council and probably through Tapestry as well. I alluded to this idea that's coming up on this next slide of the mindset shift that we really need to tap into as we move into this new way of being and living. And that's moving from feeling that every relationship we go into is one where we're competing for resources or competing for dominance, into a place where we really see that there's a place for all of us. And this is a mindset that exists on so many levels in our society and is, the water we swim in to many extents. The idea that humans have supremacy over the rest of the animal world is kind of what this picture is depicting. But it exists within sort of human society as well. And there's two interrelated mindsets there that I think we can continue to pick apart for ourselves and really try to move away from. One is that idea of dominance, that we need to compete. The other is that there's not enough to go around. So moving towards collaboration and partnership, and also moving towards really deeply believing that there's enough to go around, especially if we're in collaboration with each other and are caring for each other. And I put up a quote that says, "We're not survival of the fittest, we're survival of the nurtured." And it's the idea, I think it's just emphasizing this idea that we don't necessarily need to compete. And I've heard some compelling ideas recently that even what we think of when we talk about Darwinism, that Darwin himself actually wasn't talking about the fittest in terms of competition, but he was talking about those who are most fit for their environment. And actually often that's those who are caring for each other, who are nurturing each other. I've put up a picture that's a sculpture from Burning Man, and I'll just describe it for those who are listening. So you can see the forms of two grown-ups who are sitting back to back and look angry and hurt and confused. And inside, I actually tear up talking about this because it's just such a beautiful image. Inside you can see two children, and I guess it's meant to be their inner children who are really trying to connect with each other. And the idea that really stands out for me is the text that I have up here. Perhaps the most important work we can do moving forward is to find compassion and generosity for the pain of those who have harmed us, while also tending to our own pain and not bypassing it. And I think we can talk about this on a number of levels. When I see this, I immediately think about personal relationships, maybe particularly relationships with romantic partner, Doug, who's here today. When I remember this idea, I think it really helps us to work through conflict. And this idea can also be applied to all sorts of areas. For example, Tapestry is just finishing a contract looking at gender equity in the Kamloops area, and it's been a really powerful contract. And one of the things that we honed in on for moving forward is the idea that we need to have a balance of support and accountability for those who hold privilege. So you could apply that brush to like men in general. I don't think that necessarily should be applied there, but those who have perpetrated harm against others, including gender-based violence or racial-based violence, or violence coming from any impetus. That feels like some of the hardest and probably most important work for us to do on this relationship level, is to really understand what is the most, what work is most needed. And some of it is recognizing that those who harm are those who have been harmed, like hurt people. So it's a subject I'd like to dig into even more deeply in the future. And in the community-based podcast that will happen in 2 weeks from now, I'll talk a bit about transformative justice, which is an area that I've been doing some experimenting and some research on. Okay, the final thing that I want to talk about is just the idea of listening. And this is a quote from Matsini, a Yawanawa leader, which is, "Open your heart and close your mouth." And this is one that's quite close to my and Doug's heart. We're actually going to stay with the Yawanawa tribe for a full month this summer. It's coming up really quick. And a lot of the work we're doing to prepare for that is actually looking at some work called The Characteristics of White Supremacy, and learning how to unlearn or decondition ourselves from some of the ways that we go in to situations and want to change and want to help. I'm putting that in quotes, and want to just prove ourselves. And that's sort of these really insidious, hidden but powerful things that exist in our Western society and in supremacy culture. That as we're going to live with this Yawanawa group, we really want to be there just to learn from them, to listen to what would be supportive for them, and to do that, we think the best thing to do is just to shut up for a while and to understand their way of life and what, do they even need help? Is it help in the way that we think of help, for example? So that'll be a really big journey, and Doug and I are planning to do some recording while we're there, so we'll keep you up to date on it. So I'll end this part of me talking. Hopefully we still have some time for discussion. We still have a little bit of time. By just saying, anyone who is interested in some of the things that I talked about that were more kind of in that work realm today, I offer some courses, and I think there's at least a couple of people here who've done courses with me before on strategic learning and systems change, and it's digging deeply into some of the ideas we talked about today, but also some of that like individual and relationship-based reflective work. It's work that I really love doing. I'm really passionate about it. And I have some spaces for courses coming up in the fall and into next year, so if that's something you're interested in, get in touch. And Tapestry Collective Co-op, formerly known as Tapestry Evaluation and Strategy. Bonnie is on the call today, and Lindsay, and we have others that we work with in the community as well, and we do community-based research, evaluation, and systems change. So you can email me at robin@tapestryevaluation.com if you want any more information about that. Okay, and on that note, I'm going to stop sharing, and for those of you that are here today, I'd love to understand what anything that stood out for you from that discussion. And a question that's on my mind is if anyone has any ideas for concrete next steps that might help integrate these ideas into your own lives. Christy, who's on the call, recently gave me the compliment that I allow silence in meetings that I that I host. So certainly take your time, and if it doesn't feel like you really want to get into a discussion today, that's totally fine too. If you're just here to listen, but if anyone has anything they'd like to say, please let me know. Kim, thanks for coming.
Hi, thank you for this. I really wasn't sure what to expect, and so I think the thing that stood out for me the most was the idea of moving at the speed of trust. I've not heard that before, and I think it's really beautiful. So I will actually take that with me today and consider that as I move forward with other things. So thank you for that.
That's great. Yeah, it's such a powerful, short phrase that packs so much, hey?
Yeah, what comes up for me, Robin, with that one is like some of the times where we've gone into different adventures together, different businesses, organizations, just journeys together, and then ended up on the other side of it and being like, whew, what happened there? So, sometimes it went a little sideways and be like, it was at this moment that we weren't moving at the speed of trust. It's like, that's where that wasn't showing up. And it's just there over and over. So, yeah. I'd never seen that quote before that you showed with it, and I really liked the way that's positioned. So thanks for putting that up.
Yeah, thanks for that, Doug. I want to reiterate that in my work life and personal life, often when things have not gone as I want them to, or when things have gone south, it's because we just needed to go slower, and it was the trust that was missing. So just saying, yeah, I agree, Doug.
I'll jump in here, Robin. I really enjoyed the part. I've heard you talk about this before about kind of survival of the nurtured, and really thinking of our network as our resilience. And it just brought up some things for me around, I guess, sort of both personally and professionally, like the things that I do, kind of with the intent of building resilience, just taking the time to kind of stop and include people in them, and form those loose connections. And it made me think even geographically, like just starting with my neighborhood, and some of the personal, like, food security things that I'm doing in my own backyard, reaching out to other people who are doing it too, and being able to kind of create more of a community around that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I mean, I assume the kind of things you're talking about are around growing food, and maybe are there other things that come to mind for you with that, Bonnie? Like things that you're doing to build resilience?
Yeah, mostly, I guess, for myself, it is mostly around growing food. And I mean, we often say that the more local food in local bellies, the more resilient we will be as a community in terms of supply chain issues and natural disasters and climate related disruptions of our food system. And so it's I often think about the tension between, I put a lot of effort into experimenting with urban farming and urban micro livestock. I have chickens and meat rabbits, and I'm getting bees, and I like, questions come up for me in terms of like, how is this building resilience for anyone other than myself and my household? But there are a lot of people in my immediate neighborhood who are doing similar things, and I've started to connect with some of them, just for various reasons, bee mentorship and lost rabbits that I've found and things like that. And it's it's kind of strikes me as a way of building sort of neighborhood level resilience, to have strong connections in that. And it's a fairly niche thing. Obviously not every person or every neighborhood wants to do that. But I've just been really contemplating how to move that from an individual activity to something that has more community relevancy.
I love that. And honestly, what stands out for me as you're talking, Bonnie, is like the different ways we can live in close community that aren't necessarily sort of removing ourselves to a piece of land that's probably or is very likely stolen from an Indigenous community at some point along the way, and living in an eco-village, but instead we're on urban land that's still probably stolen from an Indigenous community, but at least we're not just taking a piece of land, but we're staying where we are. We're staying in we're literally living in close community geographically, and we can become closer to each other and probably make a lot of transformational change from there. So I really love that viewpoint.
Yeah, exactly. That idea of kind of like rooting deeper where you are.
And yeah, making changes and creating stronger relationships and becoming more resilient at that, let's say, immediate community neighborhood level that can then spiral up to that higher level. Yeah, thanks. And thanks for all that neighborhood resilient space work you do. Does anyone else have anything else they'd like to jump in and say, or we can also end early if that feels good for folks?
I'll jump in and say something. Something that came up for me during your talk was your interest in tarot. And I was wondering if you've consulted cards at all about your upcoming trip and if anything is coming up for you from that.
That's a really good question. I haven't, but I would like to. So thanks for that suggestion. I will say the way that I work with tarot is it's not about sort of telling the future or how things will be. It's more like understanding what perspective might be helpful. And tarot is so much about finding balance between different energies. So masculine, feminine, emotional, intellectual, passionate, and earth-based, like all of the different elements, and so that the perspective that it can offer is usually really well-rounded. So I think it'll be a really good tool to kind of maybe help ground myself in what I'm sure will be a very challenging, transformational, and sometimes overwhelming experience for our family.
I think it might help conceptualize a lot of the different experiences and kind of create a frame around some of the things, because I'm sure it'll be just having traveled to Costa Rica recently, a tropical location coming from Kamloops, just so on a sensory level, even without that level of cultural dislocation, is just so overwhelming. So I'm really excited for you and your family. That'll be a wonderful experience.
Yeah, thanks, Jessie. I can't wait to, I guess, communicate about it, like let people know how it is. Yeah.
Robin, this is Christy. I'm going to chime in
Christy.
too. Hi, thank you so much. This has been such a rich hour. You have covered so much incredible ground, and I always just love listening to your voice. So thanks for inviting me today. Well, you know me, I think for me, anything around relationships always stands out. And because I have the privilege of working for an agency that does provide funding to organizations, that idea of mutual relationship and mutual benefit is so important, and something that I think we need to start really socializing among other organizations like mine and folks who do invest in community, because it's not top down, and we are privileged to be able to invest in community and to be able to have, and it's so much more than that transactional piece. And I think that that's something I really appreciate that you highlight, the privilege we have to do this work, and what we gain as opposed to what we give. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Christy. Thanks for coming. And before I forget, I just want to ask the question to you all, if you're okay if this discussion part is part of the recording and released as part of the podcast and on the YouTube. or if anyone has any concerns about that. I see a thumbs up from Jesse and Brahman and Bonnie. Awesome. Christy, awesome. And I just want to say, like, as you're talking, Christy, I'm just noticing like who came today and how I have really great personal and work relationships with all of you, which feels really nice. And it feels like the beginnings of community, or that there is rich community. So thank you all for coming. Any other thoughts before we end at 1 here?
I'll share a little bit since I haven't spoken yet. I mostly came out of curiosity today, Robin. I wanted to see some of the things you do, because you worked with our team on strategic planning, I guess, kind of evaluation stuff. But yeah, I really appreciate the relationship building. My team and I have been working to, I work with Interior Health, but I'm not necessarily here representing them today. But we've been doing a lot of work with improving our relationship with Indigenous people. And for a lot of work with Indigenous people, it's very different from how we work in these sort of government-based organizations, because relationship really is the foundation. And that seed of trust is huge, right? It's slow going. There's been a lot of distrust between our organization and Indigenous people in the past, for very good reason, unfortunately. We've been doing some anti-racism work as well. And just because we've been talking, there's this workbook we've been doing, and in it they have a word from Squamish, and I'm not going to say it right, but I'll put it in the chat. Chenchenswe, which is a Squamish verb that means to uphold one another and support one another. So it's really that idea of the mutual aid, and that like we need to stop helping because helping is so downward looking, and that's really we can't sort of continue having that as our main model. So yeah, I appreciated today's chat. Thank you, Robin.
Thanks so much for coming and for sharing that, Bronwyn. I feel like there's so many layers that I notice in myself to really learn that. Intellectually, it makes sense to me, and like I mentioned earlier, it's becoming obvious as we prepare to go into the jungle that I'm sure there will be missteps and oversteps and times we're not listening. So yeah. Wonderful. Well, I want to thank you all again so much for taking this lunch hour here in Kamloops to listen and to learn together, and to talk about what's coming up for you around relationship. And I look forward to working with you all more and again, and seeing you in community too. So we'll be meeting again for 2 more of these. This is just a 3-part series, so in 2 weeks, and then June 8th as well. So thank you so much. And if you're listening to this and want to know how to join, you can email me at robin@tapestryevaluation.com. So thank you all, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.